Welcome to the battlefield of the Benko Gambit, where black doesn't defend, they attack. In this video, we'll uncover the most powerful Benko Gambit traps for black, showing you how to turn white's ambition into instant disaster. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned player, get ready to unleash chaos and dominate every Benko line like a true strategist. In the Benko Gambit, danger hides behind every pawn. And today, we turn that danger into devastation. White begins boldly, pawn to d4. We meet them head-on, knight to f6. They claim more ground with pawn to c4, but we strike back, pawn to c5. White pushes pawn to d5, trying to shut us out, but we're just getting started. We launch our pawn to b5, the classic Benko Gambit, a daring offer of chaos. They accept the bait. Pawn captures on b5. We continue fearlessly, pawn to a6, another sacrifice, another step toward victory. White develops, knight to c3, and we reclaim swiftly, pawn takes on b5. They fall deeper, knight captures on b5, believing they've gained the upper hand, but they've awakened the beast. We strike. Bishop to a6, slicing into their queenside with deadly intent. White calmly replies, pawn to e3, preparing to defend, but it's already too late. We capture, bishop takes on b5. Their bishop rushes to recapture, bishop takes on b5, and now comes the finishing blow. Our queen storms forward, queen to a5, a thunderous check, paralyzing their defense. White's position collapses before they realize what hit them. Every piece trapped. Every move doomed. That is the power of the Benko Gambit, where we sacrifice not to lose, but to obliterate. They thought they were safe, but in the Benko Gambit, one careless move and their world collapses. White begins with pawn to d4, and we answer with knight to f6. Then pawn to c4, pawn to c5, pawn to d5, pawn to b5. White declines convention, playing pawn to b3. So we take, pawn captures on c4. White rushes to rebuild, pawn takes on c4, but our plan is already in motion. We steady our defense, pawn to d6, and prepare for war. White develops, knight to c3, and we fianchetto, pawn to g6, our bishop soon to dominate the long diagonal. White grows confident, pawn to e4, staking the center. We calmly position our bishop to g7, eyes gleaming down the board. Their knight jumps to f3, but that's exactly what we wanted. Because now, we strike. Our knight lunges forward, knight captures on e4. White takes back, knight captures on e4, and in that single move, they lose everything. Our bishop swoops in, bishop captures on a1. Their rook is gone, their position shattered, and the battlefield belongs to us. That is the ruthless beauty of the Benko Gambit, a sacrifice that lures only to destroy. In the world of chess, few openings strike fear like the Benko Gambit, a battlefield where every pawn hides a dagger, and one false step leads to ruin. We have pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn to c4, pawn to c5, pawn to d5, pawn to b5. The Benko Gambit is on. White captures, pawn takes on b5, thinking they've gained a pawn, but we strike back, pawn to a6, inviting chaos. They defend with pawn to e3, but it's too late. We capture back, pawn takes on b5, and the trap begins to weave. White dares to take, bishop captures on b5, perfect. Our queen slides to a5, check. The knight blocks with knight to c3, but that only fuels our fire. We develop bishop to b7, aiming straight down the long diagonal. White retreats the bishop to d2, trying to stay safe, but we tighten the noose, queen to b6. Pressure is mounting. They play bishop to c4, a natural move, but we counter with pawn to e6, opening lines and dark intentions. White nervously retreats again, bishop back to c1, and we strike, queen to b4, staring right into their heart. White tries to trade queens, queen to b3, but our plan is already complete. We capture, pawn takes on d5, opening the center, tearing it apart. If they dare exchange queens, the board explodes, and soon their position crumbles. This is the Benko Gambit's dark beauty, a storm disguised as sacrifice, where we give one pawn and take the soul of the position. When White plays boldly in the center, we answer with chaos. This is the Benko Gambit, where every pawn sacrificed becomes a promise of destruction. Pawn to d4, knight to f6. Pawn to c4, pawn to c5. Pawn to d5, pawn to b5. The Benko Gambit has begun. White develops carefully with knight to f3, thinking they're safe. But we continue the assault, pawn to g6, bishop to g7. The fianchetto flames are rising. White builds their fortress with bishop to g2. We calmly prepare. Pawn to d6. They take the bait. Pawn captures on a6, and we smile. Because after we play pawn to a6, the trap begins to breathe. Now we strike. Queen to a5. Check. White blocks with knight to c3, unaware of what lurks next. We leap forward. Knight to e4. A monster in the middle of the board. White tries to challenge with queen to c2, but we capture their knight. Our knight takes on c3. Then comes bishop to d2, their last hope of stability. But our queen slides to a4, relentless, venomous. They play pawn to b3, desperate for air. We retreat queen to e4, perfectly timed. And when queens are exchanged, our knight lands on e4 once again, unstoppable, dominating, and deep in enemy territory. This is the Benko Gambit's silent vengeance, a trap not of luck, but of precision. We sacrifice a pawn to conquer the board. In the Benko Gambit, we don't just fight for victory, we engineer chaos. Every pawn we sacrifice drags white deeper into the storm. Pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn to c4, pawn to c5, pawn to d5, pawn to b5. The Benko Gambit is unleashed. White tries something strange. Knight to a3, and we grin. Because this is where our trap begins. We push pawn to b4, kicking that knight backward. It retreats to c2, but now we take control with pawn to d6. White plays pawn to e3, trying to hold the center. We counter with pawn to e6, the lines start to open. Their bishop develops to d3, and we strike, pawn captures on d5. White's queen slides to f3, eyes on danger, but we ignore the threat, bishop to g4. The queen tries to wriggle free, moving to f4, yet we calmly capture again, pawn takes on c4. White takes back with bishop to c4, but it's too late. We hit the center, pawn to d5, an explosion of control. White's queen moves to e5, trying to cling to hope, but we defend beautifully, bishop to e6. Now their bishop checks on b5, a desperate stab. We block smoothly with knight to d7. White's bishop retreats to c6, and that's when our rook storms forward. Rook to c8, the counterattack ignites. They capture one piece on d7, we take back with the queen. White castles for safety, but it's already over. We push pawn to h6 and calmly bring bishop to d6, our army fully mobilized, our trap complete. From a single pawn sacrifice to total domination. That's the Benko Gambit, where every move is a whisper of danger and every sacrifice becomes a masterpiece. That's how you crush white with the Benko Gambit, using fearless tactics, deadly traps, and flawless timing. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another chess opening trap or master strategy. Comment below, which Benko line surprised you most? And remember, in chess, the best defense is a beautiful counterattack.